Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast. And today we are reading issue number 119, and just a little catch up on what happened in the last issue. The last issue was all about life and death. We had one of John's friends named Straff's mother dying from old age, and we had the birth of Rich and Michelle's child. And that was pretty much the main focus of the issue, just, the difference between those two things happening at the same time. And one thing that was insinuated to happen, and I'm not sure if it actually happened or if this was just an interesting thing they threw in to make it seem like it happened, but at the end of the issue, you're led to possibly believe that Straff's mother put her soul inside the baby that was just born. So, not sure if that happened or not. It was just kind of left for you to decide. So it may have happened, it may not, who knows. But anyway, first things first, with issue 119, we see what looks like a painting of the Hindenburg, the Zeppelin that exploded in, I think it was the early 1900s. And this is like the moment that the explosion happened, I guess, because there's one area where the skin is torn on the top of the blimp and flames are shooting out of it. But like I said, this is just a painting or something, because we see John kind of leaning on this painting from behind, and he's got a cigarette in his hand right above where the Hindenburg is exploding, almost like he caused the explosion of the Hindenburg or something. And he's giving a very mischievous look, like he might do it. And we also see on this page that this is written by Paul Jenkins with art by Sean Phillips. And as we turn to the first page, we get 4 different panels of 4 different scenes that are happening what looks like simultaneously. The first panel looks like it's of the Titanic. The second panel looks like a warship of some kind from the maybe World War II era. The third panel has a pirate ship, and the fourth panel has a submarine. And over these panels, the narration says, "Somewhere, it doesn't really matter where, there's this ship plying its way through a freezing sea. The name's not important. Could be Lusitania, or General Belgrano, or Titanic, but there's a familiar ring to it. In fact, maybe this isn't just one ship. Maybe it's an amalgam of lots of ships, all with one thing in common: trouble." Then we turn the page and we get the ships in their own panels once again, but we're seeing scenes of, I guess, the destruction of those vessels. And the narration continues. "It's damage amidships, as it always is. It's the obligatory explosion down in the hold. If you close your eyes and imagine, you can hear the screams of cold-dusted men with no means of escape. Your gut might feel the roar of gushing, superheated water. A few lucky survivors row away into the India ink of history. They've been permitted to escape so that they may bear witness to another imperfect symbol of human arrogance. If you listen carefully, you can hear what they hear, a strain of music across the water as the band plays on. It's a merchant ship transporting a certain kind of terror across a million sleepless nights. It's a fishing vessel going down with all hands somewhere in the uncharted waters. It's a passenger liner groaning in protest, rivets popping like corn, steel bending, muffled by the fog, smokestack crashing into the waves. It's the echo of a final scream as another lost soul succumbs to the pull of the ocean." Then we turn the page again and we get a panel of what looks like the Titanic on the bottom of the ocean floor, and we see a small baby submarine examining it. Then we get a panel of a woman with her son, and they look ghostly, like they're underwater and it looks like they're probably drowning, but they also are staring right at us like maybe the drowning isn't bothering them because it's their eternal state. And over these panels, the narration says, "Look into the darkest depths of your awareness, right behind the anxiety dreams and the irrational fears, and you'll find this ship. It steams full ahead through a sea of fever dreams towards its inevitable demise. It represents us and everything we're afraid of. It's every ship that ever went down or ever will. It doesn't matter. It happened such a long, long time ago. It's going to happen again." And we also see on this page that the name of this issue is Undertow. Then we turn the page and we cut to John Constantine in a pet store, and there is a bowl of dead fish in front of the store owner. And John is saying, "They're all dead." And the man behind the counter looks down at the bowl, and his helper is kind of chuckling in the background, and he says, "Very perceptive of you, sir. I take it you did attempt mouth-to-mouth resuscitation." And John does not like this little joke, and so he says, "Listen, Tosh, normally I'd love to sit and banter, fill your otherwise inglorious day up with a little sunshine and light. But my girlfriend went away last week, leaving me with just one simple task, to feed the frickin' fish. Thing is, she'll be off the train at 5:30. And then he reaches over and he grabs one of the fish out of the bowl and holds it up in front of him and says, "So unless we stop prating about, you won't see much difference between me and him by 6 o'clock. And he kind of wiggles the fish as he says this. And the store owner kind of puts his hand on his face like he's got a problem and he's thinking about it. And he says, well, I'm not sure if I can help you with that, sir." And then John motions to the wall of fish tanks with his hand and he says, "Do what? You've got 500 million fish in here." So the man behind the counter takes the bowl of dead fish and empties it. And he says, "Yes, but we can't just go willy-nilly handing out our prized specimens to any old hooligan coming off the street now, can we? Especially an admitted mass murderer such as yourself, if you pardon my vernacular." So obviously he's still kind of joking around with John, but he is doing what John requested. He is filling up the old bowl with new water, and he is getting some fish out of the wall of fish tanks, and he turns to John and says, "Besides, fish matching the description of the deceased are very hard to come by at such short notice, with Christmas just around the corner. No, I suggest you take one of these home, get out your water-resistant felt tip pens, and paint them." And then as he finishes putting the 4 fish into the bowl, he hands them to John with a big smile on his face, and he says, "That'll be £18.50, please." And as a very annoyed John grabs the fish and begins to walk out, the man says, "Do come again, won't you?" And as John leaves, he says, "Bollocks." And as John exits the pet store, we see outside Rich and Moppet are waiting for him, and they're having a conversation, and Rich is saying to Muppet, "I'm telling you, Mupp, he put the entire tube of fish food in there, the dopey git." And Muppet replies, "Huh, she'll fucking kill him." And as John walks past them, Rich jokes and says, "Avast ye landlubbers, it's Captain Ahab." But John just keeps walking and says, "Zip it, all right." And Rich says, "Don't be such a stroppy bastard." And John stops walking and says, "Yeah, well, it's easy for you to say, isn't it? I mean, neither of you silky sods has to face the fucking wrath of Khan, do you? You were just accidentally transported across time and space, and into the fucking parrot sketch." And then he starts walking away from them again. Then we turn the page, and we cut to the launch of a space rocket, and we see some astronauts getting on this vessel, and then we see it starting to take off, then something wrong happens, and then we get an explosion in the sky. And the narration over these panels says, "It's the nervous chatter of daring young men as they prepare to go up into their flying machines. It's 4 Chinese test pilots sitting on the business end of a half-designed rocket. It's a spark, then a scream, then an image that's seared into our minds forever." Then we get some panels of people who are watching this launch, and they look horrified as the debris rains down from the sky, and the narration continues. "Down below, the witnesses' faces reflect the emotions of all mankind. Concerned family and friends can't harness their confusion and horror as Icarus lights up the sky. The cameras continue to roll, ensuring that this moment will be replayed again and again and again, lest we forget. This is a powerful imprint into the fabric of our souls that begs the question, where were you when it happened? 10, 20, 50 years from now, we'll suddenly shudder at the memory. We'll wake from our fitful sleep, choking on the memory. But today, all we can do is watch in silence as we view this icon for the first time. With a stentorian howl, Icarus falls and falls and falls." Then we see the debris of the Icarus begin to morph, and then it turns into bird shit as we cut away from the disaster of the Icarus and back to John. And of course, the bird shit lands on his shoulder, and as it hits and he looks at his trench coat, he says, "Oh shit." And then he raises his fist to the sky and says, "I don't believe it, you bastard!" And he gets a tissue out of his pocket, and he begins to wipe off the bird shit from his shoulder, and his narration says, "I used to think the gods were conspiring against me, but they couldn't possibly be this bloody Machiavellian. No, they probably planned for this to be a perfect day. The larks were going to sing their lungs out. The sun was going to rise in glorious technicolor, and everyone was going to be in a good mood. And as John says this last line, we flash to this morning, and we see John is waking up, and then he walks into the restroom, scratching his belly, and his narration continues saying, "Even me. I was going to spend all day watching telly, scratching my balls and feasting on steak and kidney pies. I was going to have the best bloody day of my life. Then I woke up. We see the first thing that happens as he enters the bathroom is he hits his head on the corner of the medicine cabinet, which puts a big gash on his forehead right above his left eye." John's narration continues. "I can see the gods now, sitting around admiring their newly devised plans, patting themselves on the back at their cleverness. And in stumbles the god of revelry after an all-night bender and spills coffee all over the table. So now they're all scrambling about, trying to clean up the mess. Someone accidentally tears a corner of the plans. Down on the material plane, yours truly has just cut his hand while trying to open the frickin' first aid kit." And we get a panel of just that. As John is trying to get a bandage out of the first aid kit, he's struggling to open the lid of it, and as he does finally pry it open, the corner catches the top of his right hand and cuts a big gash in it, and it begins to bleed. And I should mention that in the current time, as John is walking out of the pet store, we do see he has a bandage on his hand and a Band-Aid on his eyebrow. So we're getting the little backstory on how those things happened. Then we get a flashback panel of John staring at the dead fish in the fishbowl and holding it up in the morning sunlight, and the narration continues saying, "The whole palaver probably culminates in a lot of celestial bravado and finger-pointing. By this time, any semblance of order is now out the window. All that's left is a bunch of cuts, bruises, and dead fish. That's how we ended up with this bloody disaster." And as John is coming up with this scenario of how the gods ruined his day, he's kind of looking to the side, not paying attention where he's going, and we see a dog taking a shit on the sidewalk in front of John, and in the panel underneath the last bit of narration saying this is a bloody disaster, John is about to step in that dog shit. And as we turn the page, we see he does step in it, and he says, "Shit." So John walks over to the curb of the sidewalk, and he begins to scrape the bottom of his foot off. We see Rich and Muppet are laughing and pointing at a homeless man who's walking around all manic, and he's talking crazy, and he's saying, "Icarus has fallen here, the marvelous boy who challenged heaven with his wings. We're going down in flames. You mark my words. Halley's Comet was the real one, not Heaven's Gate. I was the pilot. I saw it." And then he sees Muppet and Rich, and he turns to them, and he continues saying, "It's coming. Don't think for a second that it won't. And when it does, there'll be hell to pay. It'll get you and that Tony Blair and the tax people, and it'll bring you down to earth. You're all too close to the sun." And then the homeless man sees John behind them, and he points directly at John, and he says, You hear what I'm saying? It's the end of the world." And John just kind of ignores him and lights a cigarette, and he says, "I should be so lucky." Then we turn the page, and we get some more panels of a disaster. This time it is inside of a mine, and we see the mine shaft is collapsing on all these workers. And John's narration says, "It's everywhere, all at the same time. It doesn't matter when. Somewhere in Poland 22 years ago, a mine shaft collapses. 17 are buried alive. That same mine shaft disaster reverberates backwards in time, resurfacing as burning flesh and crashing girders some 20 years before in Johannesburg, killing 87, to be echoed in an earthquake yet to come, somewhere in southern Florida. The same terrifying sound rumbles across the ages." And like the narration said, we do see the original mine shaft disaster, then there is the explosion in the mines in Johannesburg, and then we see the future event in California where a bunch of people are buried under collapsed rubble. Then we cut back to John on the sidewalk, and he is waiting at a crosswalk for Muppet and Rich to catch up, and as they walk up to John, we see the shadow of an airplane wing move over them. As we turn the page, we get a very strange panel of an actual airplane wing just kind of parking right above them, but this is on a normal street, so there's no way that an airplane actually landed in front of them. So what I believe is happening is John is about to get a premonition of some kind of airplane accident that's about to happen, but it hasn't quite hit him yet. It's just starting to push on the edges of his consciousness. So as he stands there and this airplane wing is kind of looming over them, we get some panels of The onlookers looking in terror as the spacecraft exploded, and then people in a village pointing and looking at a mine shaft exploding. And over those panels, the narration continues saying, "A long time ago, the earth suddenly spits fire. A town of thousands is unprepared for the coming volcanic destruction. Down below, the witnesses' faces reflect all the emotions of mankind. Up above, a grotesque image imprints on the collective psyche of humanity. A familiar burning lights up in the sky. Somewhere, a mine shaft collapses." And at that last bit of narration, John feels this premonition coming, and he looks up in the sky and he sees an airplane taking off, and his narration says, "And me, I suddenly see how it's all connected." And he says out loud, "Blimey." Then we turn the page and we cut to that airplane, and we see inside everything's normal, people are seated and nothing's really happening. And over these panels, the narration says, "It happens over the slightest of split seconds, and all of history. Somewhere, it doesn't really matter where, superficial passengers are filing into a plane that may not even exist. It's business as usual aboard this amalgam of every plane that ever headed down a runway or ever will. There's nothing obviously awry inside, just a vague, undefined malaise. The usual air of trepidation you'd find aboard a big piece of metal that shouldn't be in the sky, but this one's taking off in the wrong direction, heading for a collision on the Synchronicity Highway, now carrying an extra uninvited passenger." So from the first class, we see the curtains open and the astral projection version of John walks through. So he's tangible enough to see, but he is see-through, so you can kind of see the shadows of the curtain behind him as he closes it. And we do get a panel that shows that John is just standing on that sidewalk still, looking up at the plane. So I'm not sure if this is something he did on purpose, like he projected inside this plane, or if it just happened automatically because of this premonition he's getting of things that must happen, because all through time, these fateful accidents are kind of echoes of each other happening over and over again. And as John stares up unmoving at that plane, his narration says, "And yet, none of this is really happening. Maybe it's just a flight of fancy, or maybe a premonition." Then we cut from him to the baggage hold of the plane, and the narration continues. "There's a noise building somewhere down in the hold. You can hear it. It's a humming, like a bomb about to go off. But if you listen carefully, it's something different. It's a million voices connecting across time and space. It's the sound of people drowning." And under that last bit of narration, we get the screaming face of the mother who was drowning from the Titanic. Then we cut to inside the plane, and we see the no smoking sign light up. But of course, John begins to light a cigarette, and of course, a stewardess immediately walks over to him and says, "Sir, this is the non-smoking flight. You're not supposed to be back here." And Astral John, with a very sad look on his face, turns to her and says, "It's not going to matter, love. I'm sorry." And as she reaches out to grab his arm, her hand goes right through him, and she says, "Oh my God, are you? Oh my God." And then she runs out of the back area that's curtained, and as she comes through the curtain, we see a bunch of skeletons in the seats in place of the living humans that were there before. And the stewardess begins to freak out and says, "There's gotta be some mistake. Can you help us?" And Astral John just takes a puff of his cigarette and says, "Sorry, love. I'm on a different plane." And of course, he means a different plane of existence because his body is down on the ground, and with his astral body, he can't really do anything. Then inside the plane, the tension is kind of interrupted by the intercom speaker chiming to notify the passengers that the pilot is about to speak. And as they wait, John's narration says, "Time seems to hesitate for an instant. The sound of a pilot clearing his throat is the sound of a mine shaft collapsing. Now everyone knows with absolute certainty that something's gone terribly wrong. The awful extent remains to be seen. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcement will begin." And then the real announcement does begin, and from the speaker we hear the pilot say, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are all going to die." And as the pilot says this, we do see the skeletons are gone and the regular people are back in their seats. And one of these people yells, Oh no! Oh Lord, please!" And as something explodes in the cargo hold, John's narration says, "It's the obligatory explosion down in the hold. It's the damage amidships. It's every disaster linked across time. If you listen, you can hear them all." And as the plane nosedives, we cut back into the passenger area. And this time, all the passengers are actually all of the people that we've seen dead from all the other disasters. So we see an astronaut, and we see the woman from the Titanic, and a bunch of other people from the mine shafts, and John's narration continues. A connection is made across time and space. Victims past, present, and future are brought together by a shared experience, unique to their situation. Each of them knows they are going to die. Then we cut to the man who was praying to God earlier, and now he's screaming as he turns and he sees a miner that has a burned face smiling very creepily at him. And as the oxygen masks fall, John continues to puff on his cigarette, and the narration continues saying, I'm standing on a London street below, but I can feel everything they feel. It's a roaring wind, absolute helplessness. It's anger. It's smoke blowing into the cabin, obscuring everything. It's a ridiculous notion. Maybe I can find the exit, jump out and survive. Then we see an old woman praying with her rosary beads saying, Mother of God, full of grace of thy lips. And now the plane is fully vertical, just flying straight into the ground. And as it's about to hit, John's narration says, it's a prayer with nobody left to answer it. Then at the moment of impact, we get like the snapshot of all the people who are about to die. And a couple people are saying, it's not fair. And the stewardess is cringing and saying, I don't wanna. And as the plane crashes into the ground, the physical John, who's standing on the sidewalk, drops the fish tank and it crashes down, exploding onto the ground. And as the fish flop around, Moppet yells, Christ! But John hasn't moved from his position, just staring up at the sky. So Rich says to him, ground control to Major Con job. Come in, mate, over. And then John just kind of looks over at him, but he doesn't move. And Muppet asks, aren't you going to try and save him then? And John answers, no, Mupp. There's no point. And from everybody's reactions here, we can kind of assume that a plane didn't just crash in front of them, and maybe John's premonition was just something that's going to happen at some time in the future. Because as this issue insinuated, all of these disasters are linked, and they're all kind of happening simultaneously at the same time through time. So it might not be happening now in front of them, but it's going to happen at some time in the future. So John just begins to walk across the crosswalk, and Rich is still confused, so he asks, what happened, John? And John answers, I don't know, mate. Nothing, I suppose. And then he flicks his cigarette down to the ground, and we get a panel of it tumbling to the air and then hitting the ground in a burst of embers. And in between those two panels, we see the same panel of the spaceship exploding. And as the cigarette butt smolders on the asphalt, we get a large panel of the Hindenburg exploding, and people are running away as flames engulf them. And from John saying that nothing happened, he supposes, his narration says, nothing new anyway. And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at Planes, Trains, and Comic Books, all one word, @gmail.com, and we will see you on the next one.